motivated. They're just motivated to do something else. And there's a reason they're choosing not to come to my class. Right? Why they do what they do. What are some reasons for y'all? Maybe not for my class, maybe for other classes. What are some reasons you may make that personal decision to not go to class?
Like tomorrow, I have a leadership facilitation, and I'm gonna miss my 9:30 class because, like, facilitating like young adults is what I prefer to do. And I don't know. Not that I don't want to go to class. It's just like I'm more motivated to do that.
So why you're not coming to class? It's because you're making a choice to do something else. What are other things impacting your decision?
May not get off work till 3 a.m.
May not get off work till 3 a.m. And so for that particular morning, sleeping in seems a lot more important, right? So we've got to realize that motivation, again, it's not a lack of, okay? There is no such thing as a lack of motivation. It is simply why people do what they do, and it's our job as leaders to figure that out, okay? And so people have it. It's kind of like if you had a whole bucket full of, I don't know, something to drink, water, whatever. It's gonna go somewhere, right? It's never gonna be empty per se. But you're either gonna choose to put it in this cup, or this cup, or this cup. You're gonna divide it out. Everyone has motivation, okay? There are two main types, but before we get into what those two main types are, I want us to watch a little video. And hopefully this volume doesn't just, blast y'all out here. Let's see.
Bribery works for my kids. They love to be bribed.
8, 9, 10.
For 50 cents, I can buy whatever I want in my house.
Oh, I forgot this dog.
The closest thing to a worldview, I would say, in freaking house, is that incentives matter. Not just financial incentives, but social incentives and moral incentives. Our goal was to figure out, can we cheaply and quickly move the needle at a school? Can we get kids to achieve more as quickly as possible with spending very little money?
There are 900 freshmen in our experiment. At the end of every month, we hold a payout event where all the kids who have gotten all P's and above receive $50 in cash. In addition, those who qualify are also eligible for a lottery where they can win $500. To win the money, they have to have no more than one unexcused absence, no all-day suspensions, and all your grades at the end of the month have to be a C or higher. It's great to give them this financial reward, but it's also about having a lot of fanfare around it, giving them this big Ed McMahon check, sending them home in a Hummer limo. I think there's definitely a limo effect.
Awesome. Oh, that is so cool. Are you serious? They get to writing that? Oh, that is so awesome. Oh my God. This is awesome. Oh, yes. Yes. You are getting straight A's from me. Yes. There's a lot of things that I would do with money. I mean, I work all year round. Hi, I'm a representative for Euro Change Words No Shopping Service. We charge $3 for a walkway and $5 for a driveway. Would you like that higher services for today? Hook, line, and sinker. They say money doesn't buy happiness, and I agree, but I disagree. That's all you look at. When they say money can't buy happiness, they say material things cannot make us happy. Wanna bet? Wanna bet?
Okay, PPL 083. Unfortunately, that person did not meet the standards this month, so we should not give them the money.
You know what you need to do next month, right?
Yeah.
Okay. See, your funds are going to be meeting the standards next month?
Oh, yeah.
All right.
I took a look at that limousine. I'm like,
Oh, you saw the limousine outside?
it's awesome. It's nice. The way it was
Invisalign over other learners.
Only
Really?
Invisalign treatment uses smart track technology. It moves teeth more comfortably and predictably.
Of course. I already thought I had waded through the 3 commercials beforehand. Should know better. I don't know why it's ending. What do you think happened to the students' grades? So we'll just end it there. So the student, Urel, that they highlighted. So he was all excited, right, about making better grades to win money. And y'all kind of saw what his January grades were. What do you think happened the next month? They went up. What happened in March? Kind of stayed about the same. What about April and May? I mean, big time crashed. So I've posted an article in Canvas if you want to read up a little bit, and it's a newspaper article about this experiment that they did. This was a real experiment that was done at a school in Chicago. So Freakonomics, if you've never heard of it before, you can find them on Netflix. They have a whole documentary where they do little experiments like this, taking like economic principles and applying it to kind of real life everyday things to see if it works. They wanted to know, we say we're motivated by money, okay? Would it work in improving school grades? Because overall what they figured out is like if we paid kids at the end of every month for better grades, that would actually be cheaper than some of the remedial stuff and all the things that we're having to invest in schools. So if it works, let's see. But what they found over time was that it might improve the students' short-term motivation, but long-term, it not only didn't have an impact, sometimes it had a negative impact. Why might that be? Like, what's y'all's kind of gut intuition as to why getting money at the end of every month for grades didn't work in improving grades for these students?
Because not every student wanted it.
Not every student wanted it?
Or they didn't want it. I mean, like, they all may have wanted it. They just didn't want it.
Okay.
So, like, they just kind of like were inputting all this work and effort and stuff, and they weren't really getting any reward, physical reward.
Okay, so for maybe some of the students, like the money was nice at first, but then it really didn't have that much impact. Do y'all remember at the beginning of the semester I asked y'all whose parents paid you for good grades? Okay, how many of you would say that that really genuinely worked in helping you make better grades? Or do you think if your parents hadn't offered you that, you probably would have made the same grades anyways? Right? Sometimes that's just our propensity, our personality towards how we approach school, right? My parents tried that like one semester, worked for me, didn't work for my brother, like he could have cared less. All right, why else may this idea of paying kids to get better grades, why didn't it work? Well, and it's like you might have gotten the $50 every month, but you weren't getting the $500. So you started to kind of feel down on yourself, and you're like, is this really worth it? Why else?
I think if they would have put it in a higher end school, I don't think it would have worked because those kids, not saying all of them get money from their parents easily, but like money isn't a factor for them. So I don't think it would have worked in the higher end.
Absolutely. So it is interesting. The school that they went into was a low SES school. There is a direct correlation between, do y'all know what SES is? Socioeconomic status. There's a direct correlation between SES status and often students' performance in school. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And there's reasons why we need to address that. And so that's why this school was targeted for that experiment, was to say, okay, this is a group of targeted students that need some additional help with improving their grades and their performance. I will say, I don't like that the emphasis is on performance. It should be on learning. Again, that's another conversation we could have. But they thought, okay, if this is low SES, then perhaps money would be something they were motivated by. If you watch the whole part of this experiment, I think in the Freakonomics documentary on Netflix, it's about 15 minutes long, what we find is that for a lot of the students, The $50 was great. They weren't necessarily getting the $500 raffle or getting the chance to ride in the Hummer limo on the way home. And so they're like, well, why not give me more money? Right? Any of y'all ever felt that way about money? You work a job for a while and you're like, time for a raise? Especially maybe a job you don't like so much. Not that you're not motivated to do it, but maybe it's one that wouldn't be as high on your priority, right? We all can function that way. This experiment is a really good example of the two types of motivation, and those are intrinsic motivation, which is internal. Intrinsic motivation is this idea that you are motivated to do something just simply because you think it's important. You value it. You don't have to have people trying to manipulate you to do it or offering you rewards to do it. You'll just do it because you want to. And then we have extrinsic or external motivation. And so this idea of having to get something, you're motivated to do something because something externally is providing you an incentive to do it, or has talked you into it, or has manipulated you into it. So paying people for grades is a way of trying to get someone extrinsically motivated. What you need to know, the huge overarching thing between these two, is that again, if we were to draw a graph of like motivation over time, when we as leaders try to use extrinsic motivation to get people to do what we want, initially they're going to be motivated. So you're going to see a rise. But over time, it is going to decrease, and oftentimes it's going to go below zero, right? It could potentially in the long term have a negative effect. So in the short term, extrinsic motivation works, but in the long term, it doesn't. Intrinsic motivation, on the other hand, is the only type of motivation that is going to increase over time and remain steady. So if we as leaders can get people intrinsically motivated to do something, if we can get them to do whatever it is we want them to do because they value it, you kind of meet in the middle, you find consensus, you get them involved, they want to be a part of it and you don't have to force them to do it, their motivation is going to stay steady long term. Which do you think is better to use? Intrinsic or extrinsic?
I think it depends on the situation you're trying to motivate someone for. I mean, I think the cookie cutter answer is obviously the intrinsic, the internal motivation, but I think that takes a lot longer to like build that rapport with like someone, and I don't know.
Can you change someone's intrinsic motivation to do something or not? How? How can you change someone's intrinsic motivation? I genuinely want to know, because we can't find the answer to this, in the sense that like that probably, and again, most of y'all are involved in some form of ag education, ag leadership, ag communications. We're trying to motivate people a lot, and a lot of times it's in learning environments or spaces. And we use a heck of a lot of extrinsic motivators, don't we? What are some examples of extrinsic motivations used in education? Huh? Candy. So yeah, how many of you have been in, as a kid, like passing out the candy? You go to a leadership workshop, we put candy on the tables, right? Like all kinds of free stuff. What else do we do in education to try to extrinsically motivate you? Anybody school give out attendance awards in elementary school? Yeah. Or like student of the month awards. We do lots of awards. Or end of the year assemblies, right? And like, you get the English class award, you get the science, I don't know. What else do we do? Grades. Are grades a form of intrinsic or extrinsic motivation? Extrinsic. Because then we base what you're able to do based off of your GPA, right? So we hope that because you know you've got to have this certain GPA, you would become motivated to do whatever you need to do to earn those grades. That's really, I think, the crux of education right now, is that we're learning we can do all this really cool stuff, but again, it only works in the short term, not the long term. So how do we get students to be intrinsically motivated? I don't know the answer yet. Okay, so again, some differences just to make sure y'all know the difference between the two. We participate in things because we simply enjoy it. Going to the outdoors. What are some other things y'all are intrinsically motivated to do? Just because you like it.
Going to the gym.
Going to the gym. On the other hand, are there people who are extrinsically motivated to go to the gym? I don't know if I'm a person who is intrinsically motivated to go to the gym. But if I have a reason to that's extrinsically motivated, I'll go. I enjoy it. Right? So extrinsic, we do something because usually there's some type of reward at the end. Right? We are more apt to persevere, work harder, and produce higher quality work when our motivation is intrinsic. Would y'all agree or disagree with that? Why would you agree? Why would you agree that when we are intrinsically motivated, we will persevere, work harder, produce higher quality? I think you're just less apt to give up, right? It's something that you personally really want to achieve because you enjoy it, so you're going to keep trying, okay? The bottom bullet, I think, is really important because, again, it's not always one or the other. We're not always trying to motivate people extrinsically or just intrinsically. Sometimes these things happen together. So if any of y'all had something that you've been intrinsically motivated to do, but once those rewards or those external things start coming into play, you realize you kind of start losing your enjoyment for it. Any of y'all ever experienced kind of that phenomenon? I get that way sometimes with things that are competitive. So I really like sports. I played 3 sports growing up, all through high school, and I really, really liked it. But the moment things started to become so super competitive, so like our high school basketball team, they really tried to get us to join like a travel league that then was doing like additional stuff outside of school play or whatever you call it, high school athletics, and wanting us to be on this travel team all year long and da-da-da-da. I was like, this isn't fun anymore for me. And it made me not enjoy basketball as much as I used to. What happened there was this phenomenon that we have to sometimes be careful of as leaders, that we can have people who are intrinsically motivated to do what we're asking them to do, but we've got to realize sometimes when we introduce those external things or those extrinsic motivators, it can actually make people's intrinsic motivation decrease, right? It can have this negative effect. But how do we do that when we're leading a group of people? Because not everyone's going to be intrinsically motivated, right? So maybe we do need those external things. Y'all are kind of seeing the conundrum that we can get into when it comes to motivation. And it's kind of like, what in the world do we do? Again, good example of this talks about nursery school students that when they would draw with magic markers, so like just drawing, coloring, they were given a reward, right? Do little kids naturally usually enjoy coloring and drawing? Yes, all the time, right? But what they found is that when they were given a reward for drawing over time, they weren't as excited about doing it, and they actually stopped participating in it as much. So it's this idea that sometimes when we put in those external factors or external rewards, we change what becomes play to us into work. How does that mind shift change our motivation? Why are we more motivated to play and less motivated? Again, not lack of motivation, but less motivated to work. Again, what's something for you where what was considered play turned into work?
When I was younger, I mean, I still love reading, but we had bucket readers, and so it's like you could go to Pizza Hut if you read a certain amount of books. And I like when everything's fair and everyone else, well, nobody in my class would ever get it, so I would just get all of them for a month. And I felt, and so then I would proceed to give all the buckets to everyone else in my class. The teacher would yell at me for it and everything, and I just stopped reading for maybe 2 months. And my mom was like, I don't know how to get her to read again. And so they stopped bucket for my class. And so then my mom would have us a pizza party at the end of the year, so everyone could eat pizza. And I would start reading again, because I was just disappointed that nobody else wanted to read. I don't know.
But to that pressure of meeting a certain quota or things like that started making what you found enjoyable not as enjoyable anymore. Anybody else have an example of something for you that changed from play to work?
I'm an avid equestrian, and I had my first ever horse trainer. She was amazing until it was time to start training for my first horse show. And me and my best friend, I mean, after every lesson it was bawling because we were just getting yelled. I mean, we were 11 years old and making something we were so passionate about into this job that we just did not want to do anymore. Yeah. I mean, and even winning, we did fairly well on the show, but it wasn't, we were oh, thank God it's over, because it was something we were supposed to be looking forward to, but
right.
Turned into this terrible, terrible thing.
Any example from y'all? No? Anybody else over here?
I have one.
Yeah, Sharon.
So I was really involved in 4-H and everything, and with 4-H comes a lot of community service, at least with my chapter. I was in Horse Project, I was also a horse girl. And I remember I did so much community service until I got to my senior year of high school. My high school actually required 60 hours of community service between a certain period of time to graduate, and you had to do a presentation on it. And because I was forced to do community service, I was like, I am done. And after doing it, I was like, I'm never doing community service again, which is horrible, and I have done some. But it's it really burned everybody I knew was like, I'm never doing it again. I've done so many hours, between this, in 2 months, I can't do it again. It was crazy. And I feel like it turned people off of community service from then on out.
How many of y'all were required to do community service to graduate high school?
Okay, cool. Just us.
No. I saw the same phenomenon happen with a lot of people I knew that had this requirement. And at my high school, by the time you graduated high school, so you could do it all 4 years, you had to have 250 hours.
Not fair. We had
right?
16 in 3 months.
And so kind of what happened is kids were like, what would you do as a high schooler if you knew you had to do that? You would just be like, give me something I can serve at. I'm going to count my hours, and once I'm done, right? Do you think people would be more civically engaged in their communities if there wasn't this cutoff of what you got to do? Shaking your head in the back. Why do you think yes?
I just feel when it's a requirement, it seems like a chore.
Yeah.
I have to get community service for an organization that I'm in, and when I think about what to do, I feel like I have no ideas. But then I look back and I'm like, well, I'm involved in church. I do this and this and this, but I'm not thinking about it because I'm enjoying it.
Exactly. It doesn't feel like community service, and it almost would seem weird to do it and then ask someone afterwards to sign a piece of paper verifying it, right? Totally weird. I get it. So, I mean, I think we can think of a lot of examples like this. Community service is a good one of where what would be enjoyment and play, and maybe even things that we would be more naturally inclined just to do, this external reward minimizes our actual desire to do it. Okay? So we know that. We know that giving extrinsic awards can undermine the effort and quality of what someone does. So not all of you may be parents in here, but as you think about this idea of giving money for grades, what would you do as a parent?
My parents really didn't give us money for grades, so it was more stuff that we needed for out in the show barn, for didn't get to truly see the money. They were like, well, if you do this, then you'll get this at the end.
Okay. So it wasn't money, but you knew there was something
Yeah.
in. And so you feel like that was effective?
To an extent, because now, like, I got to a certain grade and I started working, so, like, it was really like, oh, well, if you do this, you'll get this, and I was like, no, like, I don't want to do that. I can just go out and get it myself and not have to do whatever you guys want me to do. Like,
Mm-hmm. So it kind of released, it was I don't want to say form of control, but a form of power. And once you realize that, hey, I don't have, I can, even if I'm not motivated to do it, I now kind of have my own agency to do it. That form of power ceased to exist anymore. Okay. Any other opinions? Would you or would you not give your kids money for grades?
My fiance's parents did not pay him for grades, but he's like the most motivated person, like school-wise, just because he wants to be so successful for like his family. And it's really interesting to see because my parents did. Well, they attempted to a little bit when I was younger. And I just struggle in school a lot. I like try hard, but like it's really hard for me. So like I didn't really find a lot of reward in that. I found more like negative like energy, like, oh, man, I couldn't get a B. I don't get the $5 or whatever.
Mm-hmm. That's where that discouragement comes in, why it decreases motivation sometimes.
I know this is like kind of a different term, but I have type 1 diabetes, and my doctor I go to, he's a pediatric doctor, and I've gotten him since I was 9. Anyway, and so he said each time like you go, they check your blood sugar and they give you like this range of like how it's been, blah, blah, blah.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, so then he said if it's like below I think it was like 7, each time it was like $20, which it never was a problem for me because I've always taken good care of myself. But he said for like younger kids, like especially like younger boys, they've always, like that's always the ones that struggle the most. And he said since I've done that, he said the numbers of all the kids have completely changed. He was like, he's done it for probably like 8 years now. I mean, for me, it's, at the time, whenever I was young and he did it, I was like, yay, and now I'm just like, okay, like, I got it, but I mean, I always take care of myself, so it's still a reward, but I see, like, in the younger kids, it really did help them.
Absolutely. I do definitely think there's, like, a developmental piece to this. So my son, he'll be 5 in December, and it's amazing. He has no real concept of money in that, like, he thinks a quarter's a dollar. Anything's good. But the power of money that it can have over kids, and then realizing, like, oh, I can buy this toy, or I can do whatever. We tried doing the chore chart where he got paid for doing chores, and I mean, age-appropriate chores, but, stuff like that. How many of y'all got paid for chores growing up? Okay, so quite a few. We thought, well, that will work. Well, what it turned into was like, he wasn't truly doing like the chores every day. It'd be like, well, let me do them all at one time and now give me the money. Or like, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this little 4-year-old booger is already trying to manipulate us. Like, how does this happen, right? And so when COVID hit and we were all in quarantine, about a month in, I looked at my husband and I said, we're nipping this in the butt. And he said, what? And I said, he's been talking about having a lemonade stand. He's going to earn his money. It's a totally different perspective, seeing it. And so I do think that there's some age appropriateness where external rewards work to motivate, but we have to know when to shift and change those. I think when it comes to people's health, it's a great motivator for kids. Because if I send my child to school and he has to choose between white milk and chocolate milk, what do you think my kid's going to go for? Chocolate. But I want to hopefully help him get into a place where he makes better decisions, right, for his health. And so I feel like that's maybe one thing that your doctor's trying to do there too, is like help these students or these kids see the benefit of better, healthy decisions. My son made $55 this summer with his lemonade stand and is thrilled. But it's also been awesome as a parent to be like, oh, you want something? Go get your lemonade money. Like, he's learning that value of working for something himself, and da-da-da. I'll let you know next year if it works out. I don't know. This is my first go around with this gig, so we'll see. I'm not perfect. So some general principles of motivation. Again, all behavior is motivated. It's just everyone's motivated in different ways, in different directions. Okay? Intrinsic motivators are related to our individual goals and our activities. So they're very personal. What one person's intrinsically motivated to do will not be the same for another person. And so we can't try to kind of like put this sweeping assumption onto everybody. And then again, extrinsic motivators usually have very little relation to a goal or a task. All right? It's usually about just getting people to do what we want. It's usually about our goal, not that person's goal. Have y'all ever thought about it in that way? We want to motivate someone, get them to do what we want them to do because we need them to do it. Whereas we should really step back and say, well, what's that person's individual goal? What are they wanting to learn? What are they wanting to do? And finding where we can meet them in those areas that they're intrinsically motivated. Okay? Some expectations that we typically have. We usually say, if we think a person has a lack of expectation or lack of motivation, usually we need to just admit that they're not meeting our expectations. Again, there's no such thing as lack of. Okay? And we need to realize when we say they lack motivation, we're making a value judgment. And that's not fair. All right? We don't need to do that to folks. Right? Do we make judgments about why people choose certain jobs over others? Do we make judgments about maybe why some people have certain jobs and have to be on government assistance? I've heard people say, well, they must lack motivation to work. We don't know their situation, y'all. Or maybe their motivation's different and we just haven't tapped into that and engaged them in that part of our society. Okay? There's different ways to look at this than to just say people lack motivation. So 5 theorists. So I said there's going to be some theories we talk about. Intrinsic and extrinsic motivation is really just this like guiding principle about motivation. And we'll see it pop up in these other 2. We're going to talk today. We'll probably get through the first 2. I don't think we'll get to hierarchy of needs. But the first 2 are theory X, theory Y. And that's from a guy named McGregor. And then we have B.F. Skinner, reinforcement. And hopefully you've heard a little bit about reinforcement before. So McGregor, very plain and simple. His idea of motivation puts people into 2 camps. He says people, and really this is more of not so much putting people into camps, but putting leaders of people into 2 camps. Okay, very important distinction there. If you're a theory X leader, you have this assumption about people that you think they are going to avoid work if they can. Any of y'all relate to that? Theory Y people, they assume people love work and will do their best. How might these 2 assumptions affect how the leaders try to motivate the people who work for them? What type of motivation do you think a theory X leader uses? If they think people are going to avoid work, what are they going to do? They're going to use a lot of extrinsic motivators, right? So again, attendance policies at school. What else happens at school? We think, and we can change this, rather than it being work, we can be college. College students aren't going to go to class, right? A theory X professor assumes that students are going to avoid work, learning, going to class as much as they can. How do these professors tend to respond? Do they provide a lot of extra credit? Sometimes it's definitely an external reward, right? They think people will be motivated. I have been amazed to find over my 10 years of teaching that it doesn't matter how much extra credit I give, the students who need it are never the ones who take it. Ever. And I will put like a big period beside that. Like, ever. The only students who ever do extra credit are the students who would have gotten a good grade anyways. It's just this like fascinating phenomenon. But I still dose it out, hoping one day someone takes a nibble at it, right? A Theory Y professor who assumes that students love to work and that they're going to come to class and do their best. How are they going to engage with students? Is there going to be as much emphasis on grades? Probably not, which can freak students out, right? Because you've kind of been conditioned a little bit to pay attention to grades. But, you know, maybe it's just a couple assignments. Maybe it's not as many big tests throughout the semester. More flexibility in your assignments, perhaps, right? Like not as clear-cut rubrics saying everything they need to do to earn every single point. It allows students a little creativity and freedom, right? So it's all about tapping into those students' intrinsic learning processes. So again, I view teaching as leading, and so I think a lot of times we can kind of flip these words about work into learning. Then we have Skinner, on the other hand. Any of y'all taking psychology? Either here in college or back in high school? Okay. You remember Pavlov's dog? And kind of update us. What was that experiment about?
It's like when he would ring a bell or anything, the dog would come eat. And then if there wasn't, then like he would take the bowl away, and whenever they would ring the bell, he would go to the same spot. It's like you were conditioned.
Yeah, all about conditioning. So that's a big word there. So Skinner developed this idea of positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement based off of Pavlov's experiment with his dog, saying, well, if animals can be conditioned and we give them, again, positive reinforcement, they'll continue doing the behavior we want. But if not, if we, you know, maybe we don't want them to do a behavior, so we shock them a little bit. We don't shock people. But again, provide this kind of negative reinforcement, then it's going to stop them from doing the behavior we want. Skinner really developed this theory off of it. And what's important to know about Skinner is that it's also part of this like overarching kind of error of how we view the world called behaviorism. Okay, big word there. And it's important for y'all to know that because this has probably impacted education more than anything else. And when we talk about positive and negative reinforcement, I think you'll see that it has really influenced how we developed our education system, the grading system, rewards and punishments in school, you name it. So it's kind of interesting to talk about. So this idea, reinforcement theory, all says if we want to control someone's behavior, behaviorism, we can do it externally. So it leans very, very, very heavily on the idea of external motivation. Again, could there perhaps be some repercussions that most of our education system is focused around behaviorism with external motivation? Yes. Okay. And it's this idea that we can learn from our past behaviors. Behaviors that we are often rewarded for, Skinner says, we'll repeat them. We'll do them. And behaviors that we are not rewarded for aren't repeated. So it's important to know that that idea of negative reinforcement doesn't mean that there's a punishment. It just means that you're not rewarded for doing that behavior. And so because you're not getting a reward, you're not going to do it. Right? Again, my son talks all day long. Me and my husband are both introverts, and we do not talk all day long. What might be a behavior as a parent, good, bad, indifferent, it's probably not a good thing, but sometimes he just talks, right? What induces him to continue talking? What would be the reward he gets that tells him, hey, this is good, I'm going to keep talking? When we talk back, right? But if he's doing something we don't want him to do, is it better for us to punish him, so using coercive power, or just ignore it? What works better for a child?
Ignoring them.
Ignoring them. Because once they realize they're not getting a reward, and again, it may not be money or candy, it could just be attention. they'll often stop that particular behavior. So to help you remember that negative reinforcement doesn't mean punishment, just think of ignoring. What's a behavior you maybe ignore to try to get people to stop doing something? I stopped answering my mom's phone calls every day, 3 times a day. I love my mama dearly. My brother and sister are a little codependent on her. She would call like 3 times a day in college. And I was like, no, I'm not doing this. And so I just stopped answering.
I'm sure my mom doesn't say anything.
To you?
That's probably why she doesn't answer. I call my mom at least a dozen times.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So like I'll just blow up her phone until she'll like call me. Like I'll literally blow up her phone,
100%.
pager, like until that woman.
I'm like cringing on the inside.
She does not hear the anyway. When my mom called me when I moved out to go to NOC,
Again.
she's like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." Now see, that's how my dad is, and I'll ignore those phone calls. But
I'll ignore my dad.
I ignore my dad, but my mom.
I like calling my dad.
Okay.
Because he doesn't call unless he wants something. So, yeah.
Yeah. Any other type of behaviors, maybe of friends that you ignore, hoping they'll stop it?
I have like a friend that just is very, like, really likes attention, and it sounds really bad.
No, I get it.
But she's like anything she does, she just wants you to like be looking at her and like giving her all your attention. And like, I just try to like, if I like see she's wanting my attention and she's like staring at me, I'll just like make sure I'm not looking at her at all. So I'm like, I'm not gonna give you this attention for something that's little and dumb and you don't need all this attention for.
Right.
I'm kind of in the same situation, I guess. I have a friend that, like, if we have a friend group, there's like 5 of us, and we all pretty much do everything together. Like this summer we went to Wyoming together, and she didn't go with us because she had work. And like as soon as we get back, like something, like she does something to like, she lashes out per se, I guess. Like, whether it be like in a very, very negative manner, or like she'll bring a dog home, or like she'll do something very, very stupid that she knows that none of us are gonna like. And it's just like, why?
It's
And
kind
so
of like
a lot us
wanting to
decide
have that controversy, and so you just choose to not my circus, not my monkeys kind of
We
thing.
tried, like we've tried the confrontation over it too. Like it just never works. So we just we all just try to ignore it the best we can and move on.
Yeah.
My friend, she sends me TikToks all the time, and I just don't respond. I don't like it. I'm like, I love you, girl, but stop. So I just don't respond.
And eventually people catch the hint, or
I don't know.
whatever, you know. So the thing about Skinner's theory is that it's a little intuitive, right? And like he kind of picked up on something that we do naturally as humans. We do have this perception that we can control other people, don't we? What's the only thing you can control? Yourself. You know. A little counseling here today. But we do kind of have these hopes, though, that we can control other people. And Skinner tapped into that, and he said, yeah, and we can do it through positive reinforcement. So when people do what we want them to do, they're going to keep repeating that behavior because we give them a reward for it. And we're going to ignore or use negative reinforcement to get them to stop doing the things that we don't want repeated. All right? We do have time to get through Maslow's. We'll see what we get through here. So Maslow kind of took this different perception. You know, I would say on one end, you have theory X, theory Y, and reinforcement theory that's pretty simplistic, right? It's kind of got these 2 dichotomies with it, that you're either this or that. We use it to motivate people. And theory X leaders lean heavily on extrinsic motivation. Theory Y leaders lean heavily on intrinsic motivation. Positive and negative reinforcement both are extrinsic motivation. But Maslow kind of swoops in from the side and says, let me have you look at this from a different perspective. Hierarchy of needs. Anyone heard of this before? This is probably one of the most quoted motivation theories in education. It's used a lot in the K-12 system to think about how do we get students motivated to learn. And what he did is he says that essentially we're not motivated to do anything, or we're not going to choose to be motivated to do a particular thing until our needs are met. And those are physiological, safety, love, esteem, and self-actualization. And so once, and how he does this is he has it broken up. Let's go to the next slide. He creates this pyramid. And you start at the bottom and you go all the way to the top. And the thing is, though, is that you can never reach self-actualization until all the lower needs are met before it. And so self-actualization, if you want to put something, that would be intrinsic motivation. So he kind of says people are never going to be intrinsically motivated to just do things, whether it's learning, engage at work, do all this stuff, until they have their needs met. And some of those needs may be some of those extrinsic things. So he kind of says not so much that an extrinsic's bad, he says it's kind of a necessity. Like we've got to approach people a little bit with these extrinsic things if we do want them to reach intrinsic. And so this plays into learning and education a lot, because as an educator I would say I may want my students to be intrinsically motivated to be in my class and to learn and to have fun learning, but if they don't have food to eat all the time, they're going to be sitting in my class worrying about being hungry rather than caring about the learning process. So what do we do in education systems to address people's physiological needs? If we're like, if we think this is going to get in the way of their learning, what is something we do to address it? Reduce lunches, free or reduced lunches. Here in Stillwater, all students get free breakfast. Right? Like, I don't have to give my kid breakfast anymore. He goes to school and they all get it. It's amazing. Right? What else do we do?
At the daycare, we give the kids snacks throughout the day. Just like, because it is such a long period, so they do get hungry, and that way they don't stop class to ask, can we have a snack or something? Like they know they're gonna get it, so they're okay.
Right. We provide that nutrition. We provide that food. There's a lot of school systems that now will send home with students food over the weekend, like the food backpacks or what have you. Because again, it's not just a problem that happens Monday through Friday, right? Saturday, Sunday, holidays, you name it. Then we go into safety and security, right? So again, we're going to go to the kind of the K-12 system. How are we going to provide safety and security to students? Why might that be important to think about for students?
If they're in an abusive home.
If they're what?
If they're in an abusive home, but right now they're having troubles with it, with classes going on. The number of reports have gone down.
So teachers are mandatory reporters. So if they're trained to identify certain symptoms, or what's the word I'm looking for? Physical, things that would say, okay, the student may not be in a particularly safe environment. And if that's the case, they are mandated to report. They can be, sorry, I have pregnancy brain really bad today. Anonymous, they can be anonymous, but they're required by state laws to do that. That is an issue that's been happening with online learning. I can say here in Stillwater what the school system's protocol for that is if a student misses so many Zoom meetings with their teacher, the teacher reports and they have a wellness check done at the home. So I mean, there are still ways to provide that same service to families in the community. What about, and I mean, it sounds silly, what about tornadoes? Right? Like that's something pretty relevant here. How do schools provide safety in case of weather? Huh? Some have a shelter, some don't. Or we've learned why we should perhaps have shelters, right? When I was a kid in Florida, we had hurricane drills where literally we just put like a book over our head. Like I see the meme where they like take kids out in the hallway and they're just sitting there with a book on their head. I'm like, yep, that's the system I grew up in. like that book was going to do anything when a Category 5 came through. But You know, we do attempt to do things. Do we do things at the school itself to make kids feel safe at school? When might a kid not feel safe at school? Bullying? Have we implemented bullying policies to help address some of that? Yeah. When else might they not feel safe?
We have a bunch of bomb threats at our school, so.
Bomb threats. Man, we had a lot too at my high school. I went to a real jankety high school.
One time I went to the bathroom and they didn't even spell bomb right, so I'm like, if you can't spell it right, chances are you making it bomb. No. But no, we received like several bomb threats and then like several kids like threatened to get, the kids threatened to whip out a knife and everything. So like they had to check our bags like whenever we were walking to school.
Okay.
Plural
So-
on bomb threats? Am I hearing that correct?
We had them easily once a month my whole high school career.
We had a lot of gun carrying, but we were in a redneck, so like we would like come in and be like, hey, we got
We did
guns.
too.
And
Ours
like,
was like on a dirt road, so we always caught like sketchy people driving by, and there were
that or drugs. Drugs was
several
a really
parents
big
always.
one. It like eventually stopped, like the cops just like stopped coming, like we just have like one campus police officer who does nothing. Other than that was about it.
Yeah. We try to address, safety by having the school resource officers, depending on how many there are for the school. I know our school, because we had so many bomb threats and drug issues, we weren't allowed to use lockers anymore. They took lockers out of our school. Clear backpacks. I don't think that was implemented when I was in school, but I know my younger cousin, when she went through high school, they had to have clear bags. Again, seems a little crazy, but it was in response to safety and security issues that people had, right? So we try to do things. We try to provide nurses, loving belongingness. That's a hard one. How do we try to provide ways for students to feel? So again, if they have their physiological needs met, if they feel safe and secure where they're at, the next need we say that people need is that they need to feel loved and they need to feel like they belong to something. How do we provide that in school settings?
We do a lot of one-on-one time.
Okay.
Just to like show like we see them, we're gonna listen, and like maybe we'll do a little bit bigger groups sometimes, but we always make sure every kid gets at least 15-20 minutes a day of like one-on-one time with one individual.
Very important. So yeah, especially for younger kids.
My girlfriend's mom is a kindergarten teacher, and she makes it a point to she builds relationships obviously with the students because they're in there all day. If they have a football game or something, a game or literally anything, she tries to go just to make them and make herself announce that she is there, that she did see it and that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, it feels good when you're part of stuff to see your teachers or your administrators engaged in what you're doing. How many of y'all were part of clubs? Played sports? Right? What else do schools provide? Choir, band, all these different things for you to be involved in, right? And the hope is that you're going to meet people who are interested in some of the same things you are. You're going to develop friendships, get to know people. We can have school without having those things, right? But what we've realized is that sense of belongingness. Same thing here on college campuses. I can tell y'all that was a lot of the conversation this summer about students coming back to campus, is that a huge part, and we know this, of students doing well in college has to do with their feeling of belongingness on a college campus. Have they plugged in somewhere? Do they feel like they have a sense of community? And with all the stuff going on, it was how do we still provide that to students when we have to maintain social distancing and different protocols to keep a massive spread from happening? So it'll be interesting. Again, as a teacher, that was one thing I came into this semester saying, I may have students who aren't achieving this love and belongingness. They feel isolated. Even though we're back on campus and we are all sitting in a room together, they feel isolated. How do we do that? Because if students feel isolated, they're less likely to come to class. Again, less likely to engage, less likely to be motivated. So we'll stop there. We'll pick back up with Maslow's on Thursday. A few quick things. If you didn't take quiz 2, we're leaving it open till Thursday, so please go in and do that. Make sure you take it in Canvas. And then also for Thursday, your next homework is due. It's the MSI, the Motivation Source Inventory. Make sure you download, complete it, submit your results online, but also bring your results to class. All right? See you all Thursday.